The Genetic Book of the Dead, a Darwinian reverie by Richard Dawkins, explores the concept of how genes carry historical information about an organism's evolutionary past. Dawkins takes the reader through a journey that connects genes, evolution, and how these genetic markers serve as a book that tells the story of an organism's ancestors and their adaptations to survive. This book expands on Dawkins' earlier work on evolution, emphasizing the storytelling power of genetics in explaining the current forms of life on Earth. The central thesis of the book is that every living organism today is a reflection of its evolutionary history, encoded in its DNA. These genetic blueprints are like an archive of information, tracing back millions of years to the conditions and challenges that shaped various species. Dawkins uses the metaphor of a genetic book to describe how organisms are living documents that hold vast amounts of data about their past. Each individual carries the accumulated survival strategies of countless generations, encoded in its genome. One of the book's key arguments is that genes serve not just as physical components that produce biological traits, but also as historical documents. They can be read in such a way as to reconstruct the environments, struggles, and challenges that organisms' ancestors faced. Dawkins extends this idea by suggesting that, through careful study, we can decode these genetic books and learn about the selective pressures that sculpted different species. This not only illuminates the present-day forms of life, but also provides a window into the ancient world. Dawkins revisits his famous idea of the selfish gene from his earlier work, arguing that genes act in ways that ensure their survival across generations. However, in this book, the focus is on the narrative aspect of these genes, how they record the evolutionary history of their carriers. The genetic information stored in an organism's DNA reveals how species have adapted to specific environmental challenges over millions of years, and by examining genetic sequences, scientists can infer much about the past ecological conditions that shaped them. In many ways, the Genetic Book of the Dead bridges evolutionary biology with historical reconstruction. Just as archaeologists uncover the past by examining ancient artifacts, evolutionary biologists can piece together the history of life by studying genetic codes. Dawkins explains that modern tools like genome sequencing have opened up new possibilities for reading this genetic book. By sequencing the genomes of various species and comparing them, scientists can trace the lines of descent and uncover when and how certain traits evolved in response to environmental pressures. The book also touches on the importance of random mutation and natural selection in shaping the chapters of this genetic book. Dawkins explains that mutations occur randomly, creating genetic variations within a population. These variations are then subjected to the forces of natural selection, where only the most advantageous traits are preserved. Over time, this process produces finely tuned adaptations to the environment, and these adaptations are recorded in the organism's genes. This ongoing process, Dawkins argues, writes and rewrites the genetic book of each species, ensuring that it reflects the most up-to-date survival strategies. A fascinating aspect of the book is Dawkins' exploration of extinct species and what their genetic books might have looked like. Since we cannot directly sequence the genomes of extinct organisms, especially those that disappeared before the advent of DNA preservation techniques, Dawkins imagines what their genetic history might have revealed by studying the descendants of these extinct species, such as modern-day birds being the descendants of dinosaurs. Scientists can make educated guesses about the genetic makeup of long-gone creatures. The genetic information of living organisms contains clues about the evolutionary path their ancestors took, even if those ancestors no longer exist. Dawkins emphasizes the predictive power of genetics as well. Just as we can look back through the genetic book to understand the past, we can also use it to make predictions about the future. By understanding how certain traits have been favored through natural selection, scientists can predict how species might evolve in response to future environmental changes. This forward-looking aspect of the genetic book is particularly relevant in the context of climate change and other global ecological shifts, as it offers insights into how organisms might adapt or fail to adapt in the face of these challenges. The book also discusses the concept of atavism, where organisms occasionally express traits that hark back to their distant ancestors. These atavistic traits are rare, but they serve as reminders of the ancient genetic history encoded within an organism's DNA. For example, the appearance of extra toes on a horse or the occurrence of a tail in a human are examples of atavistic traits that recall earlier evolutionary stages. Dawkins argues that such occurrences are like pages from the genetic book, being briefly reread, offering glimpses into the distant past. In addition to the biological aspects, Dawkins also delves into the philosophical implications of viewing genes as a book of the dead. He raises questions about the nature of existence and how we understand our place in the evolutionary continuum. If our genes are records of our ancestors' survival, then in a way, every living organism is a living memorial to the countless generations that came before it. Dawkins encourages readers to appreciate the deep, interconnected history that unites all life on Earth, and to recognize that we too are part of this vast genetic narrative. The final chapters of the book explore the ethical dimensions of genetic manipulation and what it means for our future. Dawkins acknowledges that, as we gain greater control over our own genetic codes, we are effectively rewriting the genetic book. The potential for genetic editing through technologies like CRISPR allows humans to alter their own evolutionary path, something that no species has been able to do before. Dawkins warns that while this power holds great promise, it also carries significant risks. The genetic book has been written by natural selection over millions of years, and tampering with its contents could have unforeseen consequences. He urges caution and careful consideration as humanity steps into this new era of genetic control. Throughout the genetic book of the dead, Dawkins brings his characteristic clarity and enthusiasm for science, weaving together complex concepts into a narrative that is both informative and engaging. His use of the genetic book metaphor makes the intricacies of evolutionary biology accessible to a wide audience, helping readers understand how genes serve as both the blueprint for life and a record of its history. By examining the past, present, and potential future of genetic information, Dawkins invites readers to reflect on the remarkable story that is written within every living organism.